I think shootings in El Paso and Dayton, just like these mass murders anywhere, are terrible atrocities, and we should take what steps we can, consistent with the Second Amendment and common sense and the evidence at hand, to try to prevent them in the future. If you look across most of these shootings, not just here, but in places like Christchurch, New Zealand, one of the most common themes is angry, alienated, isolated young men, oftentimes who've gotten radicalized, in anonymous internet chat rooms and message boards. Seldomly who commit these atrocities without any kind of warning sign or any kind of precursor. So the red flag law is designed, again, consistent with the Second Amendment and due process of law, to try to prevent people who could be a danger to themselves, and especially a danger to society, from having firearms. I've spoken with law enforcement officials who've said, that a judge could be skeptical, understandably and properly so, when law enforcement alone goes to the judge to try to get either an involuntary commitment order or an order that someone can't have firearms. But if you have the additional evidence of family or teachers or ministers who are willing to testify, give an affidavit, in many cases who initiated it, that judges are more willing to entertain that kind of evidence. So again, consistent with due process in the Second Amendment, I think our state should consider it. I think the federal government has a role to play in terms of granting technical expertise and probably some grant money to states that want to implement those kinds of laws. I'm not saying that it'll stop every single one of these shootings, but I think there's a chance it'll at least stop some of them. I think this should be done by states. That one, states are closer to our people, their judges are closer to their communities, they have the manpower in a way that the federal government doesn't in our federal law enforcement agencies, to be more situationally aware about what's happening in communities, be more responsive more quickly. But the Department of Justice has many programs where they provide technical assistance to state and local law enforcement, or they provide grant money. My understanding, based on a conference call we had with the FBI director and senators earlier today, is that Senator Lindsey Graham plans to introduce legislation along with Senator Dick Blumenthal that would operate along these lines by providing more money or other kind of advisory and expertise assistance to states.
Do you think there's the political will out there to go back to 1994 and outlaw or ban the making of new assault rifles, or rifles that are called assault rifles?
So the action that we should take, I want to make a difference. I don't want it just to make a point. And as you say, we had a so-called assault weapons ban for 10 years in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. And the best evidence suggests it did nothing to stop these kinds of mass murders. Part of the reason why is that an assault weapon is not a real category of firearm. A pistol is a kind of firearm, a shotgun is a kind of firearm, a rifle is a kind of firearm. An assault weapon is something that lawyers in Washington cooked up as a term based largely on cosmetic features that don't affect the lethality of a weapon, or for that matter are easily changed by weapons manufacturers. So there's very little, if any, evidence that law that was passed in 1994 would make a difference. What I'd like to see is any laws that we pass, whether in Washington or in Little Rock, actually make a difference in these shootings. And so I think if you look at, again, the one common theme in all of them is angry, alienated, isolated young men, very disturbed. Many people would say they're obviously crazy, because who else would commit this kind of atrocity? I think we can do a much better job of trying to isolate those mental health factors, and also maybe looking more seriously at our mental health system entirely. We have an improving system, but it's still got a lot of gaps in it. And ultimately, the people who are on the front lines of mental health problems in this country are police officers. You encountering homeless on the street who should be in a hospital, who should be learning to take care of themselves. So there's that specific part of the red flag laws that are designed primarily to identify people like the shooter in Dayton, who apparently had a rape list and a kill list of his classmates, supposedly showed a video of the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting to a girl on a first date with him, or the Parkland shooter, who was repeatedly reported to police by his mother as a danger to society. There's that very specific reform. I think we ought to look more broadly at our mental health system as well, see what we can do to help people who are severely disturbed.
So of all the things that we've talked about having to do with gun violence, and some of the things, John was part of a project that we did back in the fall that was not just about, it wasn't focusing on mass shootings, it was just simply the fact that there are so many gun deaths in Arkansas. And so in a lot of all this discussion that we're having here, do you have any plans personally for you to do something in the Senate toward helping with the situation?
I'm eager to see what both Senators Graham and Blumenthal are proposing. This is a complicated legislative problem as well, because no one wants, a madman to have access to a firearm, especially when there are indications that some of these murders are going to do exactly what they turned out to do, like as it appears has happened in Dayton, has happened in Parkland. But at the same time, we have to respect the constitutional rights, both the due process and Second Amendment rights of every individual. And we have to recognize that a law like this could be abused as well. People could make false allegations, and it would be very dangerous to have false allegations against an ex-wife or an ex-husband, or a business rival that you've had or business partner you've had a falling out with. To have law enforcement show up on their front porch to confiscate their weapons based on false testimony. Dangerous for law enforcement, dangerous for that person. So we have to recognize that it's, although I think if well drafted to respect our constitutional rights and put some guardrails in place, that it probably could stop some, not all, but some of these mass shootings. It can also be subject to abuse and create some of its own risk as well.